4 enablers of engagement were identified in the original Engaging for Success report that was written by David McLeod and Nita Clark a few years ago. And they're still, every time we talk to any organisation about engagement, it's clear that those lenses, those 4 concepts, still apply really strongly to any high-performing, highly engaged organisations. They are characteristics, essentially, of people who are getting engagement right and understanding it. The first one is around the story of the organisation and how your employees are actually involved with that story. We tend to call it strategic narrative, but essentially that's what it is. The living history and the future and the present of your organisation, where it's been, where it's going to, and very much where you are now. And the really important part of that is that it's not your leader or your boss on a video like this maybe telling you what that strategy is or what that story is. It's not having it written down on a document that you look at once a year and then you file in a filing cabinet and have a look at it, you know, maybe when you chuck it out the year after, when the new one comes out. It absolutely is the real sense of being involved in it as a person and having an emotional connection to that story and through the story to the organisation and a commitment to where it's going. So it's in human terms, it's in human language, and people can actually understand their place in that story, where they fit, what they bring to it, how they contribute to it, and how they are attached to it in that very emotional sense. So that's our first one. We call it strategic narrative. You'll recognise the concept, I think, in any language that you use to describe that story within your organisation. The second enabler is engaging managers, and this is so important. I mean, your direct manager, your local leader, your line manager is the person that you have the most contact with at work, and most research would suggest it's actually the person who has the most influence over how you feel at work as well, and therefore probably how you behave and how you act both in and out of work. So that manager needs to be obviously doing things well in order to manage you well. And there are 3 things that engaging managers tend to do well. And the first one is that they give people both focus and scope over the work that they're doing. So they're able to translate that story that we were talking about into terms of the team and the task and the job that you have, so that you understand the big picture of where you're operating, but also the very specific thing that you have to do. And also they trust you to execute that in the way that you need to execute it, because you are the person that you are. So they are allowing you to bring yourself to the job. They are trusting you to get the job done. They're not standing over you and micromanaging you and saying, well, I want you to do this and I want you to do it like this. You are allowed to bring yourself to it. So they give you space to do that. The next thing that they do well is that they treat you very much as an individual. And that doesn't necessarily come naturally to people. It's quite easy to hide within an organisation sometimes and hide behind employee numbers, hide behind, I've got a large team, or I have to manage 30 people, or whatever it is. But actually, it can, when you start to put your mind to it and say, well, how would I like to be treated as a manager? Well, of course, you like the, how did your team do at the weekend? I like it when my boss says to me, were you dancing at the weekend? I'm a Morris dancer. That's a little bit out there maybe as a hobby, but I love it when somebody recognises that in me and knows how important it is to me. And it makes me cheerful, it makes me happy, it makes me bring more of myself to work. So there's the piece there around being recognised as an individual with individual likes, needs, development needs, ways of working, ways of learning. And the third thing that engaging managers do well is that they are able to coach and stretch their people, and that's in a very ongoing and informal way. That's not sort of a point by point scheduling a one-to-one with somebody once a quarter with a checklist and going through with them and saying, right, well, I noticed you did this and you had feedback about that. It's far more fluid than that. It's acknowledging and rewarding and thanking people for the jobs that they're doing at the time that they're doing them and great work that they've done, but also it's addressing dysfunctional behaviour or barriers or things that are getting in the way. Again, at the time, at the point of contact, not allowing things to fester so that then a hard or difficult conversation has to be had, but dealing with things sympathetically, constructively, and obviously helping people to move on with their personal growth that enables them to, again, bring more of themselves into work and do a better job for the organisation. So that's what our engaging managers should do well. third enabler of engagement is employee voice. And this can be manifested within an organisation in many ways. So large organisations may have unions, and that's definitely a manifestation of employee voice. Smaller organisations might do something like an employee survey, they might have employee focus groups. Really small organisations have the advantage of being able to simply ask their employees how they feel and how can they improve things that they're doing. And organisations that are doing this well absolutely understand that their people, and releasing the voice of their people and giving them a space in which to do so, is the best way to improve processes or products or services or whatever it is that you are offering, because the people who are working with those processes and products and services are the people who know what is getting in the way and know how best to improve them. And people will always be more committed, more engaged if they actually feel that their voices are heard. We're like that as people outside of work. Being in work is no different whatsoever. So we like to be heard, we like to be acknowledged. Most of us are fairly practical and realistic, and we know that not everything we say is going to be actioned, but if we've been acknowledged and we know that we have the ability to influence where we can influence, then we will be much happier and we will be more engaged. And then our final enabler of engagement is integrity within the organisation and trust. And this is where most organisations, whether it's explicit or implicit, will have values on the wall. They might be something like, we are trustworthy, or we work as a team, that type of thing. And people will recognise that, yeah, that's very common in a workplace, even for small organisations. But if the behaviour that you see from your leader, from your boss, from the management team, from whoever the peer-to-peer relationships are that you have, if that behaviour doesn't tally with those values on the wall, then you will distrust the organisation, and engagement will not thrive within that sort of environment. It's a real example of I mean, the enablers are all connected, but if you don't get something like that right, then employee voice doesn't work, for instance, because employees do not trust that they will be heard, and they don't trust that they won't receive comeback for something that they say. So if they're trying to highlight a problem within your organisation, but they don't feel that they can say it anywhere, then you aren't going to hear about that problem, and that is a huge issue for you as an organisation going forward. So 4 enablers of engagement: strategic narrative, the story of your organisation; engaging managers, how managers operate on a day-to-day basis; employee voice, can you hear what your employees are saying to you, and are you acknowledging that? And the last one, organisational integrity, is there trust and no say-do gap within your organisation.